Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Washington Post intelligence briefing on human leadership in the AI moment. This is our debut briefing on LinkedIn, and we are so happy to be here with all of you to discuss how AI is changing both organizational leadership and the future of work. I know my LinkedIn feed is certainly full of conversation about AI, everything from M-dashes to whether it's going to replace us all. So this is also a topic that we analyze from a variety of angles across the way it's impacting all kinds of industries here at WP Intelligence. And so today we're going to dive in to the issues that leaders are confronting as AI moves from a frontier technology to essentially increasingly a coworker. So we will discuss a few of our recent analysis reports on this topic. We'll hear from a leader in organized labor, and we'll speak with two CEOs about how AI is changing the workplace and how leaders are adapting. We'll also take your questions that you're putting into the comment section of our LinkedIn post. So thank you to those of you who've already shared your comments and your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. I'm Luiza Savage. I'm Editorial Director of WP Intelligence, which is a new kind of media that's built for executives and policymakers who need insight and foresight to see around corners of policy and industry trends. Our subscribers receive concise intelligence reports with actionable recommendations across AI and technology, energy and climate, global security, and healthcare. We do data graphics, exclusive interviews, and live briefings like this, where we sort out developments that are changing the business and policy landscape. We also host executive membership communities, the WP Intelligence Councils. So for today, here's how we'll organize our conversation for the next hour. First, we'll speak with Yun-Hee Kim, our deputy editor at WP Intelligence, about the trends that we are seeing in our research and our discussions with C-suite executives about how companies are changing their approach to workforce as they deploy more and more AI in their operations. Second, we'll speak with Lauren McFerran, who is the executive director of the AFL-CIO's Technology Institute, about the kinds of guardrails that employees are looking for in this moment, and how AI is impacting labor relations and even contract negotiations. Third, we'll speak with Dimitri Boylan. He is CEO of Avature, which is a recruitment and talent management platform that uses AI. And we'll talk about how AI is transforming recruiting, hiring, and people management. And then we'll speak with Levie, the CEO of Box, about why his company is actually expanding its human workforce on account of AI. So I'd love to thank you all again for joining us, and please continue to put your questions into the LinkedIn comment box. Our team is monitoring those, and we will take as many as we can. And with that, I'm very excited to jump in and introduce Yun-Hee Kim, Deputy Editor of WP Intelligence. Yun-Hee was formerly Technology Editor and San Francisco Bureau Chief for the Washington Post, so we are so delighted to have her on our team. And she's joining us today from San Francisco, where it's bright and early. Thanks for joining, Yun-Hee.
Thank you so much for having me this morning, Luiza.
Well, it's always great to see you. Yun-Hee, let's talk about what we've learned so far. We have published 2 reports recently on the future of work, and you've edited one of them, authored the other one. So you've been very close to all this work. One area that we've explored is the rise of AI agents as coworkers. Can you talk about how big a shift this is and how broadly it's being deployed?
It is a pretty significant shift from the era of generative AI. We're now moving into an era where AI agents, as you mentioned, are becoming kind of our coworkers in the workplace. So think of it as a worker behind the scenes that actually executing tasks for you on your behalf. To quote NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, he said, finally, AI is not just interesting, but is actually doing productive work that's valuable. So it's executing things on your behalf, such as handling actual processes, onboarding employees, for example, or tracking parts moving through the supply chain. And the market is expected to grow substantially this year. Market research firm Gartner expects spending of AI agents this year to reach over $206 billion compared to last year.
And that's a doubling, right? Just in 1 year, which is kind of extraordinary, the pace at which this is moving. So one result, obviously, of the rise of agents and the investments that companies are making in this technology is we've seen a wave of headlines about layoffs. Are we seeing evidence that AI is actually displacing jobs?
That's a really tough question to answer. First of all, we've seen so many headlines, as you mentioned, about layoffs, especially in the tech industry from companies such as Amazon, Oracle, Meta, Block, and Atlassian, and they've all cited AI as a reason for why they need to cut workers. And it's just not in the technology industry. We've also heard from Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, both large financial institutions, saying that AI is one of the reasons why they need to cut costs. But if you actually talk to CEOs and executives in the industry, some of them are actually saying that it may just be an excuse, and the numbers don't really show that companies need to cut workers. Remember that during the pandemic, there was a huge wave of hiring within the tech industry, and a lot of tech companies are actually kind of right sizing their workforces. But what is actually happening in the market is that a lot of these companies need to invest heavily in AI infrastructure to dominate this industry. And so they need to cut elsewhere in order to be able to invest elsewhere. So you're seeing a lot of companies coming out saying AI is one of the reasons why we have to kind of shift our workforces. But there's also this theory that when there is a new technology in the market, it could lead to efficiencies, and that could mean creating new jobs and even new job titles. So the jury is really still out there as to whether AI is going to eliminate jobs or whether AI will create jobs in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point to underscore because we're seeing these headlines. We're seeing employers and CEOs say AI is the reason they're cutting these jobs. AI has been the top reason that's been cited for AI for job cuts over the last 3 months in a row now. But at the same time, the data isn't quite there yet. And I had a conversation not that long ago with the new acting Secretary of Labor of the United States. And I asked him this question: what are your statistics showing you at the Department of Labor? And he said what you're saying. He said, I don't know. We don't have the right data. We can tell you how many jobs are being lost or gained. And even these big headline numbers, in the grand context of the size of the United States labor market, they're actually pretty small, and we can't jump to conclusions from them. And he is launching at the department a detailed research project collaborating with the private sector companies and with academic institutions to try to drill down more and have a better understanding of where AI is actually replacing workers or not. So I think it's not just us saying it's a little bit early to tell. I think the federal government is also trying to figure this out, which I was surprised by. I thought that was a really interesting answer. Well, I think one thing that the Department of Labor is trying to figure out is this distinction between changes to jobs or job displacement due to AI and changes in tasks, right? Replacing certain tasks, maybe not your full job, maybe your job actually changes. So I think that's a really interesting piece that came up in the report that we published. And we had a chart that kind of looked at some of the kinds of tasks that are expected to be replaced. And I wonder if you could just kind of talk us through some of the top line tasks here in this graphic.
Sure. So, what you're actually seeing on your screens are the jobs that are most exposed to automation. And this is data from Haver Analytics and Goldman Sachs Research. And as you can see, office and administrative jobs face the highest automation exposure at 46%, while physical labor sectors, think construction, maintenance, repair, those are less at risk. But the big kind of takeaway from this chart is really that overall AI could automate a quarter of all US work tasks.
And that's fascinating, right? Does that necessarily mean it automates away a quarter of the jobs, or just that those jobs change and pivot to other tasks? And I'll be so curious to hear from some of the CEOs that we're talking to a little bit later this hour on that point. But Yun-Hee, we also put together this fascinating dinner last week in New York City with about 24 C-suite executives to discuss this issue. And you wrote and published a report just yesterday with some key takeaways from that discussion, which our viewers can find on the WPI Intelligence platform. But let's talk about a few things that you took away from that discussion and what leaders are thinking about in this moment.
One really big key takeaway that emerged from our dinner conversation last week was that AI will require businesses to completely rethink their operations. Think about all of the workflows that are going to have to change. Job hierarchies are also going to change, skill development, governance, and even employee communication. So I'll share a quote from one of our participants at the dinner, which I found was really kind of very telling about the moment that we're in right now. The quote is, "The real winners are going to be the organizations that redo the entire operating system of their business."
And that is so fascinating. And you mentioned hierarchies, and we heard from participants that AI would flatten hierarchies. Why is that? How does that have to do, what does that have to do with AI?
Sure. So it's basically the idea that managerial jobs are going to change with the advent of AI. Typically, right now, managers kind of give orders or disseminate information, but all of that is going to change in the future when all of us will be working alongside AI agents. Think of the managerial job as somewhat of an orchestrator. This is kind of a term that came up during our dinner discussion last week. So you are an orchestrator of humans and AI agents. And I'll quote another dinner participant from our dinner last week who said, "The supervisor of the future isn't managing people alone, it's orchestrating people and AI agents." So it's quite telling that jobs in the AI era are going to evolve, meaning that titles may not be as important going forward, but it'll be more about the skills that people bring.
Well, that was another big topic of conversation, right? Was what are the actual skills that become more important? And what did you take away from the discussion? My takeaway was it's not, I mean, AI skills, yes, everyone will be expected to be able to work with these tools, but it was very interesting to hear what the executives thought.
Right. I think in the age of AI agents, entrepreneurial competencies are becoming way more valuable than organizations. So things like critical skills, judgment, being able to prioritize, those are kind of the skills that will become more in demand from workers going forward.
And it was really interesting. We had one participant at the dinner who is the president of a university, and they're preparing students for this new workplace. And she talked a lot about critical thinking, problem solving, and also the idea that we have to learn to become lifelong learners. So training of employees, managers, leaders, that was another big topic.
Yeah, I think training came up as a really important point and a priority. Many organizations are telling their employees use AI, but they're not necessarily training their employees. And so it is ever more important that training opportunities are given within organizations. And there was one big takeaway also that you can use peer-to-peer training where people who are using AI tools can kind of share their methods and techniques so that everyone can learn from everyone's experience. And we have a lot of AI native young graduates coming into the workforce, and they are very skilled at using some of these chatbots and tools. And reverse mentoring could be also a good way for organizations to be able to train their entire workforce.
I think that's an incredibly important topic because, as we've seen, there's a lot of anxiety among new graduates. We're seeing people booing speakers when they talk about AI at graduations. I think this chapter is not written. It may turn out that that new generation actually turns out to be incredibly valuable in the workplace, and they might actually see pathways to advancement quite rapidly if they come in and can help an organization harness and make the most of these tools. So another one that we'll have to wait and see how it works out. Lastly, Yun-Hee, I want to make sure we cover this because it was such a big piece of our conversation: communication, particularly executive communication, leadership communication. Talk about why that's become so important.
Well, it's going back to that point about CEOs announcing layoffs due to AI and cutting human workers. I think when you kind of disseminate that information about AI potentially taking away your job, it creates a lot of fear and anxiety in the workplace. And so it is very imperative that leaders are very transparent and honest about what's happening with AI use in the workplace. What should people use AI for, but also what shouldn't people use AI for? Having that kind of governance system in place and communicating that transparently, I think, is going to be ever more important. And the final point I'd make is that you don't want to be communicating that AI is going to be killing your workers. I think the better approach would be how AI could augment your workers.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you create fear and anxiety, why would anyone want to embrace this technology? And I think this is something that has been almost surprising in some of the ways that we've seen leaders communicate publicly around AI. Thank you so much, Yun-Hee. This has been just such a helpful overview of this topic that we're going to unpack with our next speakers. And it's certainly something we're continuing to cover really closely at WP Intelligence. So thank you for your work on it. So now we're going to talk about how AI is transforming organized labor and some of the issues that workers and unions are thinking about in this moment. And I think these are important for leaders of organizations to really understand what's coming down the pike and how to best address it. So I'm really pleased to welcome Lauren McFerran. She is the Executive Director of the AFL-CIO's Technology Institute. The AFL-CIO, the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations, did I say that right? It's all a mouthful, is the largest federation of labor unions in the United States, and it acts as a central voice for the labor movement, uniting dozens of national and international unions, and they collectively represent millions of working and retired people. So this is a very important voice in the labor movement. And the Technology Institute in particular is a research and educational initiative that focuses on the impacts of emerging technologies. So really thrilled to have you here, Lauren. She's also the former chair of the National Labor Relations Board. So she's had a big career in employee and management relations. So Lauren, thank you so much for joining us. We're here to talk about leadership in the AI moment, and we'll be speaking to two CEOs a little later in the hour. But I thought it's important for business leaders to hear from you and how you are thinking about the AI moment, because from what I've heard from you already, AI issues are playing a bigger and bigger role in labor relations. So how is the AFL-CIO approaching the issue of AI from a worker and labor perspective?
Well, thank you so much for having me. We really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation. Adapting to new technologies is not new for the labor movement. We've been doing this for decades now, but certainly the advent of AI in the workplace presents a unique and challenging moment. So the labor movement has coalesced behind a set of principles. All 65 affiliated unions got together and we went through about a year-long process to really think through what are the implications for workers, what are the protections we need, what are the forward-thinking plans we need to make. And from that emerged a set of principles. And I guess the high-level takeaway from those principles is that workers should be centered throughout the innovation ecosystem. And I want to be really clear here because when in your introductory remarks and when Yun-Hee was speaking, you both referred to AI agents as potential co-workers. So I want to be clear, when I say the word workers, I'm talking about human people. And we do think that human workers should be centered throughout the innovation ecosystem. That starts with the research and development process. When technologies are developed for use in a workplace, workers should have a voice in the development of those technologies to make sure that they are making work better and safer and that they will actually help make the job more efficient. When technologies are implemented in the workplace, workers should have a seat at the table to have a role in deciding how those technologies will be implemented and make sure they are not actually harming workers, their privacy, their physical well-being. And if we have issues where workers need to make transitions, then workers should be at the center of those conversations as well, making sure that transition programs, skilling programs are designed to make sure that workers are being meaningfully prepared for the AI economy. And that includes workers from all backgrounds and sectors, not just people who are transitioning with certain sets of tech skills.
Mm-hmm. Well, you told me earlier that AI is giving organized labor, as you put it, a shot in the arm. Unpack that. What does that mean?
I think this is actually a moment where many workers are experiencing profound anxiety, and particularly about the implications of AI in their workplace for the future of their job and for their children's future. And they're looking for someone to be on their side in this transition. We've done, or the AFL-CIO did some recent polling, and it seems like workers don't trust their employers to navigate this transition at this point. They don't trust tech companies, and they actually don't trust lawmakers from either party to help them navigate this transition. The one entity that polled net positive for its potential to help workers adapt to the AI economy was the labor movement, was unions. And so I really think this is a moment where workers are looking for someone to be on their side, to advocate for them. And in situations where we have unions at the bargaining table, bargaining over the implementation of these technologies, we get much better outcomes. We have protections for workers' privacy, for workers' safety. We have protections for jobs. We have incentives for employers to retain and retrain their workforces rather than lay people off. So I think it's actually a moment for the labor movement because people are in need of somebody to hold their hand here.
That's really interesting. And you sort of touched on something I wanted to go deeper on. Yun-Hee and I talked about the layoffs, and that's what's been making headlines. And again, we'll see, right, what this actually means for jobs. But talk a little bit about the many other issues around AI that employees are concerned about and that you work on, because I'm kind of fascinated. You've mentioned things that I hadn't thought about before.
Absolutely. AI systems can be used in a variety of ways. And even when the system is implemented with the best of intentions, and we have partnerships with tech companies, we work with tech companies, and they always say, well, nobody has the intention for these systems to be misused or to harm workers. But even with the best of intentions, AI systems can be used to monitor, evaluate, and control workers, often without the workers even knowing about it. We have situations where workers can be punished for not smiling enough or for taking too long a bathroom break, or where they can be pushed to work harder and faster in unsafe ways. We're very concerned about workers' data, employers collecting it and selling it without the worker knowing about it. And about the dangers of experimentation with technologies that are not entirely proven and that can harm workers or undermine their ability to do their jobs.
That's really interesting. And another thing that is striking is you told me that not all unions necessarily share the same attitudes toward AI, and that you're seeing kind of a whole spectrum of the way different unions and different sectors are approaching it. Can you tell us about that?
I mean, I think there's always a variety of perspectives within the labor movement. When you have 65 affiliated unions in a variety of sectors throughout the economy, you're going to have different perspectives. I do think that there are some unions who are more ready to embrace technology. There are others that are more hesitant. It is, as you mentioned earlier, I believe, it is hard to convince people that they need to embrace and upskill in a technology that they perceive to be job replacing. And that is one of the dangers of the narrative that you were talking about, this kind of public narrative we've seen lately where companies seem to be competing to see who can announce the most layoffs and attribute it to AI. It's both an unfortunate narrative and a disempowering narrative for workers. And it can be really counterproductive if what your actual goal is to help workers learn how to use this technology and embrace it, because sometimes has quite the opposite effect.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about what advice you would have for business leaders if they want to foster a successful workplace culture that encourages the adoption of innovation. They want to harness the benefits and the efficiencies and all the new innovation that comes with AI, but they don't necessarily want their workers to be afraid of the technology or to oppose the technology. How would you recommend that they proceed?
I'd say embrace worker voice in the process. Embrace worker voice from the very beginning of the process. Some of our most successful collective bargaining models involve giving, in a represented workplace, involve giving workers advance notice of when a technology is going to be implemented and a bargaining process so that they can have a say in how it's going to be implemented. That produces better outcomes because often these technologies, which are unfortunately not designed with the end user, the worker in the room, are not necessarily designed in a way that does make the job better or more efficient or safer. So I'd say that's step one, is to make sure that workers have a voice in the process. But I would also say invest heavily in your workforce and making sure that your workforce knows that you are ready to retain them and to help them prepare for these transitions in the economy and for these transitions in your individual workplace. And not that your approach is going to be, fire first and ask questions later. Many companies have taken that approach and they've discovered in retrospect that maybe the people that they fired were actually performing pretty important functions and have had to quietly bring workers back on because the technology didn't work as well as they thought it did.
And I know it's early days and people are still trying to figure out how to approach this, but have you seen any examples where there's been a really good approach to bringing on AI in the way that you described?
We have several unions within the Federation that have engaged in really productive partnerships with technology companies. The one that leaps to my mind right now is a partnership between the American Federation of Teachers and Microsoft, who is a partner of the Tech Institute as well. And in that partnership, Microsoft did bring teachers into the product development process, where they brought teachers and said, what's going to work for you in the classroom? What's going to make your job more difficult? They want to scale the teachers in their products, of course, that's why they're engaging, but they're doing it in a very intentional way to make sure that they are creating a feedback loop with the workers that are the end users of this product to make sure that it is actually going to not replace their job, not make their job more challenging, and that it will help them do their work better and more effectively. So the teachers have gone in and said, this is what would benefit us. This is technology that these kids are going to abuse, and this isn't going to help me at all. And the actual process has benefited from that feedback loop.
No, that's super interesting. Another question I have, since we do like to look ahead, not just at business trends, but also at policy trends, are there policy changes that the labor movement is sort of working on or advocating for relating to AI?
Absolutely. I would say we have a very strong agenda in support of guardrails in the workplace. These are addressing the issues that we talked about earlier: data privacy, worker surveillance, workers being hired, fired, and disciplined by an algorithm without human involvement. There is a lot of appetite. Workers, these laws poll overwhelmingly positively. This is levels of bipartisan support that you don't see for policies like this. We're not having a lot of traction at the federal level right now, so we've turned our attention to the states, where there's been protective pro-worker legislation introduced in many states. We at the Tech Institute are actively working in about 13 states right now to provide technical assistance, support, and an infrastructure with our state federations of labor, who are our real kind of secret superpower in this work, to help advance guardrails legislation at the state level. There are federal bills that have been introduced as well, and we would of course like those move forward in the future. But right now, states are really taking the lead in protecting their workers from the dangers that this technology can pose in the workplace.
And last question for you, Lauren. I'm curious, are you seeing any deployment of AI in your own workplace that is helping you in one way or another?
The Tech Institute we are a pretty small but mighty bunch. The labor movement overall, like all sectors of the economy, are certainly thinking about how to best engage with these technologies. organizing is a difficult process. If there's technologies that could actually make that process better, we people are looking at those. But I would say it varies a lot depending on the sector.
Excellent. Well, it's a pleasure to speak with you, Lauren, and we'll stay in touch as this issue continues to transform. And we look forward to having you back as we continue to kind of see more results and more data and have a better understanding how these technologies are both changing jobs and changing the employment levels and the shape of the workforce. So thank you so much. And you have a website that viewers can visit if they'd like to learn more about your work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, thanks so much. Well, now I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Dimitri Boylan. He is CEO of Avature, which is an AI-powered platform for recruiting and people managing, and that serves 110 of the Fortune 500 companies. So he has a lot of expertise in this intersection of AI and the workforce and human resources management. So welcome, Dimitri. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Well, great. Well, obviously, this is a topic what you work on, which is hiring, recruitment, and people management, is of particularly great interest to the audience here on LinkedIn in particular, since that's why a lot of people come to this platform. So let's start with recruiting and hiring. How are you seeing AI changing this process?
Well, I think that there's no doubt that AI is going to change recruiting and hiring quite a lot. I want to step back a minute and say that, our customers are mostly very, very large companies, and the rate at which they move is maybe not as fast as the hype would lead you to believe. Okay. So I think they have a really strong desire and actually a really strong need to use AI in the HR processes. But they're also big brands and they have to be careful, and the regulatory framework is not completely built out yet. It's stronger in Europe. It's undefined in the United States. And so our customers are moving at what they would consider maybe slightly slower than they would like to move at this time, for many reasons, not just the regulatory framework, but also simply the development of consensus, which inside the organization as to which use cases have artificial intelligence applied to them. A lot of our customers have artificial intelligence being used all over the company right now, but mostly in an ad hoc way, which is a challenge for them too, because that's not the way they really need to roll in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've said so many things that I'd like to unpack there. One of them is different use cases and the idea that companies and their leadership are still debating amongst themselves what they want to do, what is appropriate and what isn't. Can you sort of sketch out maybe the spectrum of use cases from maybe the most sort of modest to the full-on, bells and whistles version of what that would look like?
Yeah. So we advise our customers who are human resources departments. First of all, they have a mandate from executive management, go AI, because there's a competitive pressure and a fear of being left behind, not being as efficient as your competitors, and losing out in the market. On the other hand, they have the legal organization saying, well, wait a minute, we don't fully understand this technology. We don't think you fully understand it either. Okay. And, we need more clarity first. So we walk through that situation with our HR customers and we say to them, let's go use by use case and let's focus on low risk, high value things. So I'll give an example of low risk, high value. We have a very large company. They get over 1.6 million candidates to their career site every year. And very often those candidates have to find a job within 10,000 jobs on the career site. And so they visit the site and they don't find what they're looking for and they go away. Okay. And you can use artificial intelligence to make it easier for some job seeker to come into a multinational company that has all kinds of jobs, has 10,000 open jobs, and find the right job within 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. And that creates better throughput in the recruiting system. It's better for the consumer. It's better for the company. It's not controversial. Okay. There's too much information. And you know yourself when you use AI, if there's too much information and the AI helps you you'll take advantage of it. Another easy area is that you might have candidates that are coming in, and you have a job that requires 6 years of programming experience, and you might have a candidate that only has 2 years of programming experience. And because you have so many candidates, you actually are not even reviewing all of the candidates that have applied to your jobs, and you want to solve that problem. Well, the AI can easily look through those documents and say, this person has the required number of years of programming experience, and this other person does not. That's not making a hiring decision. Hiring decisions are made on a set of parameters that are very complex, okay? But whether or not you move that person into a technical interview or not, maybe there's no point in having a person with 2 years of programming experience do a technical interview for a senior developer job, because they're not a senior developer and they're not going to get the job anyway. So these are areas where companies can become more efficient, but they can also make a better experience for the job seeker and for the company itself. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, as with any new technology, some companies have gone too far, okay? There's a lot of hype around AI, and we've seen companies that, think that artificial intelligence will, read your facial expressions on your interview and try and decide what kind of person you are, okay? Our customers don't go anywhere near that type of stuff, okay? They don't need to, because we advise them that there's a whole lot of things you can do to be competitive, okay, without going anywhere near those things. There are some class action lawsuits. There are a couple of HR technology companies that have class action lawsuits right now. That was a mistake. We'll see how they play out. Our customers, though, very, very large companies, big brands, they're not trying to get in trouble with AI. They are trying to organize AI inside the organization and not have it used as hoc throughout the organization. So they need to embed it into processes. And that's why I say use cases. When you have use cases and you have defined processes, you can insert the AI where you want it to be, and you can look at exactly what it's doing, and you can look at exactly what it's done. And that's very important for our customers.
Mm-hmm. So there's another really interesting question around the use of AI when we talk about recruiting and hiring. And that is this question of bias. And I had this really interesting conversation, I mentioned it earlier, with the now acting Secretary of Labor. We have the interview on our website. And he was of the opinion that it can really go both ways, that people have biases. And yes, algorithms can embed and reflect those biases, but also they can correct for those biases too. And how this technology is implemented can either make the problem worse or better. And I'm so curious to hear from you what you're seeing, and how can leaders who want to use AI to be more efficient, but also maybe to strip out some of the human bias that they might have, how can they make sure that they're not perpetuating their own biases or historical biases through technology?
Yeah. So there's a very big distinction to make when you're talking about artificial intelligence. There are large language like Claude, GPT, okay? And then there are artificial intelligence systems, and then there are systems that use artificial intelligence, okay? And those are three different things, okay? So you can't just take a large language model. If you take a large language model and you run it, you will get whatever bias was in that large language model, because the people that created it had a bias of some degree. You cannot remove bias from systems, okay? But if you have from a system that you create, like a large language model, okay, yourself, because you're buying it off the shelf, all right? But what our customers are doing is they are putting these models inside of systems. And in the systems, you can have more than one model, okay? And you can have different types of models. So we have sometimes when our customer calls up artificial intelligence inside our system, they're calling up through an orchestrator a process with a series of models. Okay, and that's what I want to go to, is what you said is, well, sometimes you can have a bias, but you can use the AI to correct for a bias. So inside of that sequence of models, you could have a model doing one thing, and you could have another model that's looking at the thing that the model is doing and deciding that, well, when that model does those things, we need to do some additional checks. Okay, so that's the system concept. Okay, and then when you put systems like AI systems into larger systems, okay, That's when you start saying, okay, I think I have a bias over here, and I'm going to use an artificial intelligence. I'm going to use a set of algorithms to systematically remove the bias that I've detected. Okay. So again, I think it comes down to A, understanding the technology, and then B, okay, designing the use cases and the way the technology is used so that it does what you want it to do. Okay. And while that's always been a challenge with any system, it is a little more difficult. You need additional skills to be able to use AI in that context.
Right. So we've talked about recruiting and hiring, but let's talk also about people management. One takeaway from the research we've done is that the role of managers is going to change, and this idea of becoming AI agent orchestrators or AI agent and human employee orchestrators. Just tell me what you're seeing and learning about what management looks like going forward.
So our customers are in a bit of a confused state at this time. Okay. They are not able to predict the jobs of the future yet. Okay. But they do know something right now, and that is that the pyramid model of employment, where you hire lots of junior people and then you evaluate their performance over a couple of years and you move some of them to the next level and then you move some of them to the next level, and eventually through a process of elimination and education, you end up with a senior manager that is very capable of doing exercising a lot of power and control inside the organization. Okay, because so that's a pyramid model. Okay, if you don't hire lots of junior people, your pyramid model goes away. Okay, and you have to select from your managers out of a smaller pool of junior employees. So that's a fundamental challenge that, there's a paradigm shift that has to occur there in the way human resources affects the management structure of the company. They don't have an answer for that yet. I mean, they're thinking about it, but you will not be hiring as many junior people. That's a fact. And you will not have a large pool to select your future managers from.
That's so interesting. And that raises the question of training and development. What are you hearing about the kinds of skills that employers are looking for? How are they training them? And how are you using AI to support that?
Yeah. Well, so the big difference with AI is that public information is now at the fingertips of everyone. In fact, all public information is at the fingertips of everyone. Junior level people come into an organization and they mostly work organizing public information because they actually don't know a lot about the company they're in. So you might get a job as a junior person inside an investment bank and they say, go collect some data, okay, about some industry sector, that's public information, and put together a PowerPoint, okay, and present it to our customer. Well, that's done with a prompt today. So the junior person who spent 3 weeks putting that together, they don't have that job, right? So you see that jobs are that rather than saying there are some jobs that go away and some jobs that will become more important. I mean, that's probably true. Most of our customers can't make those predictions yet. What we do know is that junior level jobs across the spectrum are going to be impacted negatively. Okay, it's just the truth, right? And so what you think now is, okay, so what do you say to a junior level person or to a college student or a high school student who's going into the marketplace? And I think that one of your guests mentioned this before. You have to focus on core skills. If you're a builder, you need to learn how to build. If you're an analyst, you need to learn how to analyze. If you're a negotiator, you need to learn how to negotiate. And if you're a very big generalist, you maybe have to have good skills in all of those categories. So I say to young people today, focus on your core skills. Okay. Companies are going to change the boundary line between what humans do and what machines do. And we're probably going to shift from AI in the loop to human in the loop, human in control. And so a lot of jobs are going to change, but core skills are not going to change. and young people need to focus on core skills.
I think that's really fascinating, but it does also open the possibility that you could have a much more early career person bringing a lot more value to the organization, because instead of, doing one report over the course of a week, they can do 5 reports a day using AI, and they could very quickly have a very big impact. So I wonder if it might work both ways for those early career people. They might actually be able to impact an organization in a much higher value way much more quickly.
It does. The organization will have fewer of them, okay, because they had 5 people to do the 5 reports. Now they have the 1 person to do the 1 report. But they have a risk with that, because one of the other things that young people bring to companies is energy, enthusiasm, and the desire to break the rules and do new things. So and our customers know this, they know what they get out of young people. They don't just get PowerPoints out of them. They get enthusiasm. They get a better tuning into the current marketplace. Okay, imagine that you're a media company and you stop hiring junior people. Within a few years, you're doing the wrong stuff, right? So, even in engineering, you get engineers that come from engineering school. The schools did a lot of experimentation. You do something one way. The students come in, they say, well, I learned something new. Why can't we do it that way? And they question the way things are being done inside an organization. So if you decrease that population, you could potentially be diminishing your ability to respond to the market in the future. So our customers are thinking about what this dynamic is going to cause to happen inside the organization.
That is absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Dimitri. You're really at the front lines here of how so many of the Fortune 500 companies are thinking about the future of work, and in their hiring, in their recruiting, and in their people management. So we look forward to checking in with you again down the line as we start to see more evidence, more cases, more data, and seeing how your customers are faring with this. So thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Excellent. Well, now we're going to turn to another CEO who is actually expanding his workforce on account of AI. Aaron Levie is CEO of Box, maker of very widely used software for storing and managing data, and he joins us today from San Francisco. Thank you so much for being here, Aaron.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So I think it's kind of counterintuitive, but fascinating. You're growing your workforce because of AI. So tell me how much you're growing by and why.
Yeah, I mean, we're very big believers in this concept of Jevons paradox, which is as you lower the cost of doing something, you can do far more of it, and you get a kind of a nonlinear impact of more than compensating for the efficiency gains of maybe what you achieved in lowering that cost. And so for us, when we think about things like developing software or doing marketing campaigns or being able to do sales and outbound campaigns to our customers, if we can make that more efficient, we actually want to do more of it. And if we can make it more productive, then even more so, again, we want to be able to deliver more on it. And so this was sort of our intuition going into this wave of productivity. It's something that we've always seen when we started the business. We wouldn't exist without cloud computing. And on one hand, you would have said, well, cloud computing should make everything so much more efficient. You would need fewer engineers because they'd be doing less of the kind of hardcore infrastructure work. And what ended up happening with cloud was it actually created an abundance of now things you could do with compute and with information and across the internet. And so companies actually did even more software projects, and they did even more infrastructure projects. And so we're seeing the same thing with AI, which is that if we can deliver more software faster for our customers, then we want to actually be doing more of that. So we're hiring across the board. I think the thing that I find most fascinating is really the new types of roles. So obviously we're hiring the engineer that knows how to wield AI. We're hiring the sales rep that knows how to leverage AI. But the pretty exciting kind of early frontier change that we're seeing is actually there's a new set of roles, which are these AI automation engineers or these forward deployed engineers that are working with customers. And so we want to make sure that we're using AI to actually do more and new things in the organization as a result of this technology.
So you said something I want to hone in on, which was so fascinating, about your forward deployed engineers. I have heard this before. We've done conversations here at WP Intelligence about software as service and how that business model is changing. And one thing we hear repeatedly is, look, our customers, like, they're trying to wrap their minds around how to do this, and our business model is moving almost to a sort of consultant model where they want us there on the ground holding their hand and jumping off the cliff with them. Can you talk about what you're seeing there?
Yeah, so this is going to be a trend that sustains for quite some time. So maybe like the first thing I'd say is that if you're trying to get into AI and you're trying to sort of figure out what does this future look like, this is a great area to focus on from a job standpoint. I'd be running around every college in the country and trying to educate them on what these jobs look like to try and prepare the next generation for this kind of work. And there's sort of two modalities. There's one, which is there's going to be people like this that live inside the organization, and they might come from the IT organization, they might come from engineering, they might be even embedded in the business. And these are going to be highly technical, business savvy individuals that understand how to wire up agents inside of business processes and workflows. And every organization is going to be hiring these type of people in the future, and there's going to be hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of jobs like this. It's the kind of next frontier of IT, but even more kind of embedded inside of the organization from a sort of a business outcome standpoint. So that's the internal version of FDE. Then the external version, which probably gets a little bit more of the conversation, is every single software vendor that is doing anything with AI, and every single systems integrator and professional services firm is going to have some form of this FDE role. And so it's called forward deployed engineering. And it's a role that sort of goes into the organization of the customer. It understands the business processes of that organization, the workflows of that organization. And their responsibility is effectively how do they bridge the breakthrough technology that's coming out of the vendor with the real world environment that customer is dealing with. And that bridge actually ends up being really, really important because there's a pretty wide gulf between what technology is kind of capable of, especially given how kind of quickly AI is progressing, and then the real world environments that this technology has to get applied to. So a lot of it is sort of process re-engineering. It's about understanding how do you get fragmented data systems to be able to work with AI systems. It's how do you actually change the workflow so agents can actually participate in the process. And the reason why it's a sustaining role as opposed to maybe a one-time implementation is AI itself is changing rapidly. And so the role is often needs to be embedded to some extent within the organization because as a new AI model gets released, we had Fable 5 this week from Anthropic, almost every single meaningful jump in AI model capability means that your underlying workflow that AI model is tied to has to change in some way because the model now can do more of the workflow or it does it in a different way or the way you interact with the model needs to be different now. And so this is technology that doesn't just get implemented and then you kind of disappear and everything just works, in the same way on an ongoing basis forever. It's technology that you have to continue to kind of tune for your process and continue to get the additional gains from. So I think this is going to be, something that's quite sustaining across organizations, and it's easily going to be here for the next decade as AI rolls out through the economy.
Mm-hmm. That is fascinating. How are you thinking when you hire for these jobs? How are you thinking about skills, and are the skills changing that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think that the skills are changing. There's some sort of universal, timeless, skills that I think have always been important. So if you had asked me 20 years ago when we started Box, who are the top performers, it's going to be people that are curious, hungry, they move quickly, they want to stay up with the latest in technology. Honestly, that's exactly the same set of kind of core fundamental foundational skills that we kind of look for today. I think interestingly with AI, it's this fascinating juxtaposition, which is the technology is so intelligent in many areas, and so you'd think, well, that kind of offloads a lot of the kind of intelligence that the person needs, and so maybe you can be less technical, or for instance, in some areas, I would kind of almost say the opposite. AI is, because of how powerful it is. Yet, because of its real, sort of flaws and inherent challenges that deal with a non-deterministic system that can do massively good or bad things if it has access to your systems. You actually still need to be pretty technical to get the full gains of AI. So I would, I think there's been this conversation recently, which is, should you actually, go and study computer science as an example? And, some people get on stage and they say, that's a dead job in the future. I would take the opposite approach. I think actually this is an amazing time to be technical and to be able to understand how to actually implement these systems to make them work effectively. So if you can, a really potent combination is if you can get as technical as possible, but have a certain degree of kind of business acumen and business savvy to understand what's the real impact of these technologies inside of a business process. That's probably the real potent combination of at least the FDE kind of role and many of these new kinds of roles we're going to see in organizations.
Mm-hmm. And we have an audience question asking, how might organizations measure these attributes during hiring and promotion decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think every organization will have to be a little bit different. Again, it's kind of funny. Some of this stuff is sort of unchanged. You'll go to Silicon Valley and you'd think, well, if you are spending all day long coding with agents and the agent is writing most of the code, why would you test for the code skills of the actual engineers? And the reason is because what we're going to see with AI is everything is going to come down to this kind of last mile problem, which is the AI will do 80, 90, 95% of the work, super effectively and take that off your plate. But that last 5%, that last 10%, last 20% is actually now where we as people are going to do the real kind of manual work. And the technical skills, and technical in this case, I don't mean computer science. It could be technical in a finance sense. It could be technical in technical marketing skills, anything that is sort of the domain specific sort of understanding of that job. That matters more than ever, because that last 10% is actually where all the value gets created with AI. Because if you have an AI agent go and write, 1 million lines of code, but there's actually like, 50 lines in that million line of code that have a security vulnerability, or are the part that's going to have memory leakage that makes the system go down, that you are still going to actually have to have all of the same raw skills to find those lines of code and make sure that the software is optimized. Equally, if you have an agent go and build an entire brand campaign, but the message is just off, from what your target audience is looking for, then you still actually need all the same raw materials that you would have always needed in marketing. So I think actually in a weird way, a lot of the ways that we interview, the kind of talent we're looking for, you still need those raw materials in most of these roles. And then the big question is, can the actual person use AI effectively to get these productivity gains? And that's, at some point, it's just easier to be empirical about it. In a hiring process, go see if they can actually build something, effective with AI. In the promotion process, see what they were able to go and create and how much faster they were able to move. But I do think a lot of the kind of core raw talent we're looking for is unchanged, as a result of AI.
That's fascinating. And last question for you, Aaron. How is AI changing your role as CEO?
I get a lot less sleep, so that's probably so far the biggest change. And there's two reasons for that. One is just in our particular business, selling AI to customers. There's just a million things to do. So we're busier than ever, and our we have so much more appetite for what we can build and what products we can deliver to our customer base. So that keeps us up, and we're super excited by that. And on the other hand, even if that weren't happening, I'm enthralled with the technology, and so I'm sort of constantly using AI to sort of do all of the things that you just never have time in the day to go do. Additional market research, additional intelligence about the customer base, prototyping of new product ideas. So you'll often find me between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. just working with agents on exploring the kind of adjacent spaces to our business and our business model and our customer base. And then the reason why, again, I so believe that this is a job creator is after 1 a.m., somebody has to go do something useful with whatever we've been dreaming up as an organization. And that's going to be real people implementing something, building software, going and selling to customers. And so I think AI is allowing me personally to sort of expand, the kind of horizon and the aperture of our business by virtue of my ability to go and spin up more projects and spin up more things to go do, and then that leads to more hiring, and that leads to more more jobs within the organization. So this has been an incredibly exciting time. Again, I wish I had a little bit more sleep, but other than that, we're having a blast.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. It was a pleasure to talk with you, and really appreciate your very positive perspective on the future, which is a great way to close. Thank you so much to our audience. This is obviously an issue we will continue to cover closely at WP Intelligence, and please follow along with us, link in with us on LinkedIn, and visit WPintelligence.com to learn more. Thank you to our partners at LinkedIn, and we invite you to join us next Friday. I'm sorry, not next Friday, 2 weeks Friday, June 26th, for another live briefing with our lead energy and climate analyst, Catherine Clay. She'll help us understand what's going on in the energy landscape in the wake of the Iran crisis and the big surge in energy demand from data centers. And faced with a jump in energy inflation, we'll take a close look at what policy levers the federal government has, what it can and can't do to address high gas prices, and how all these factors are going to shape the energy landscape going forward. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much, Aaron.